Okay, welcome everyone to the Analytic Mind podcast. This is the first recorded session of 2021 for me. So really excited to introduce our next guest, Prashant Natarajan. Hopefully I've got that pronunciation right. But super excited to have you on the podcast today because I know that there is so much interesting content that we can dive into and we can leverage off your amazing experience in the corporate space, in the consulting space, but also as a keynote speaker and author. So Prashant, why don't I just throw it over to you, and maybe you can give a much better background around, based on your experiences and also some of the interesting things that you're working on at the moment.
Thank you, Sam. It's delighted to be here with you, and I'm so happy that we have tools like this, especially as a result of COVID and other things happening, where it's become easier to communicate across continents, frankly speaking. Thanks for having me on the show. My name is Prashant Natarajan. As you mentioned, I am the Vice President of Solutions that leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and analytics, specifically focusing on healthcare, life sciences, and insurance. I currently work at H2O.ai, which is objectively and widely considered to be the #1 AI ML company on the planet. And my responsibilities are taking the great products and technology that H2O creates and creating business value and customer success across the three verticals that I just mentioned. As you pointed out, I'm also a best-selling author. Have either been the lead author or a co-author of 4 books, with a 5th one coming out this year called Demystifying AI for the Enterprise, which is going to look at a topic that's close to your heart and to your listeners' heart, which is how to take the advantage of data analytics and AI to create high impact solutions that actually make it easier for humans to do their work and to get the satisfaction that comes out of using technology. My last book, Demystifying Big Data and Machine Learning for Healthcare, has been the running top seller in its space for the last 4 years now. And the reason I think it's done really well is because we have a lot of case studies there. It's not just theory and practice. It's more focused on practice, and it's focused on various leaders who come forward with validated examples of how they did it and what prescriptions and best practices they would like to share with others. And before H2O.ai, I was in various roles across product management, business strategy, and consulting, spanning multiple geographies. So I can say proudly that I have worked in 4 continents. And I don't think I do have a desire to visit the other 2 too sometime before I retire.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I mean, it's wonderful to have a guest like yourself on the podcast to talk about a lot of unique things that we haven't really even covered yet on other discussions that I've had in the past, especially around AI. That's something that obviously you've got some great expertise on, but also just someone with the breadth of experience you've had, and it'd be really interesting to see what you view as the differences between maybe, say, working in the business or working from a consulting point of view, or some other angle, especially in the analytic space. Now, what I thought would be great to start on is talking or discussing a little bit more about how you look at creating for companies or for organizations solutions like analytic solutions or AI solutions. I mean, we don't need to go into, we can, if you want, go into specifics around things you've done in the past, but I'm more interested in knowing about, or like learning from you, how you have approached building these solutions. Obviously you need to go in and analyze what can be done, then go away and build it. and then make sure that it is, you've got the returns from your investment. That would be sort of the I guess the framework that you would look at solution building from. But it'd be interesting to learn from you about some real world case studies or real world examples of how you went about this and how it turned out.
Yeah, I think the point you're making about solutions is a very important one, Sam, because in general, if we go back to recorded history, human history, as long as we have been using technology, whether the technology be the wheel or it be agriculture and cultivation and the creation of cities and population centers, or frankly, the printing press or the internal combustion engine, humans have always been looking at technology not for technology's sake. Humans have always been looking at technology to make their lives easier, to make it faster, cheaper to do things, and to get a sense of satisfaction that they didn't have before. And that fundamental human need of using technology doesn't disappear because we work with corporate and government clients today. In the end, all of us have that desire to harness technology to benefit humans, and AI is no exception to that rule. So I, in my next book, talk quite a bit about the fact that the A in AI is not merely artificial, but it is augmentation and amplification in addition to automation. And we'll talk a little bit more about this.
Mm-hmm.
But to go back to your fundamental question of how do we create solutions, if you take a look at the various studies that have been done by various organizations around the world today, roughly speaking, about 1 in 5 AI projects actually result in a quantified and qualified return on investment, which basically means that 4 out of 5 either don't go into production or stay in a POC state or an experimental state. And experimentation is very good. It's very important, especially in the data science world, because without experimenting, you can't get to solutions. But our focus as solution designers and executives must always be, am I able to meet that fundamental human and organizational need of getting value out of it? And the value spreads across multiple dimensions. Return on investment is a very important thing. The reason return on investment is important is, first, that there are dollars or the local currency of your choice that are being spent in AI that could be spent elsewhere. And everybody has a finite set of dollars, especially when we are going through a global recession as we are as a result of COVID, for people to decide where they are going to spend that. And people who spend it want to see those be successful. So ROI is a very, very important point, frankly, but it's not the only point. Because in addition to ROI, the other important impact is the process change that comes out of it, the cultural change that comes out of it, creating an organization that is insights driven from all perspectives rather than just ROI. Now, I'm not saying that ROI is not important. You have to get ROI out of it. But in order for the success to be longer term instead of short term or mid term, ROI cannot be just the only consideration. It's also one reason why typically you tend to hit a plateau with automation, because you use something like an RPA or an RCA, you're able to automate certain tasks. But what after that? Are we able to reimagine existing processes? Are we able to bring new insights to bear? Are we able to change things to make life easier for the humans who use technology? Those things go beyond the immediate short-term value that automation creates. So thinking ahead 20 years from now, for us to make these solutions work for everyone, we have to look at the bigger picture, ROI being one very important consideration, but other considerations also, which we will talk about.
Yeah, sounds good. Now, when you just getting back to the solutions part of things, because you've obviously, you're obviously going in there from an advisory capacity in your current role, but also I imagine it was similar in your consulting roles historically. How have you gone in and approached building out a solution within a customer's environment? Is there some sort of stages that you go through, or is there a framework which you use to actually build this out? And I think that'd be really interesting just to dive into a little bit more.
There are two aspects to it, Sam. So I think there's a tactical aspect to building a solution, and there's a strategic aspect to building a solution. And what I mean by that is you can build solutions that resolve a particular pain point or address a specific opportunity. And there is definitely a well thought through framework that I tend to use on things like that. And then there is the strategic aspect of solutioning, which is going beyond a point solution to bring value to an entire enterprise as a whole, or bring value to multiple departments in an enterprise as a whole. And while there are several things that are common between both approaches, there are also some significant differences. So let me start with the tactical point of view first. So in terms of solving a specific pain point or addressing a specific opportunity, for example, I think the key thing, as it always must, should start with identifying that opportunity or identifying that pain point and getting into a level of depth to understand really what it is that's the issue. Is it a top line issue? Is it a bottom line issue? Is it a process reimagination issue? Or is it just trying to use your data to find new insights that will impact all these other things? So, what I always advise my clients to do is to sit with me and sit with our teams and work with us on spending significant time upfront to understand the opportunity, to understand the pain points, but also to understand the current process and understand the current data. Because what typically happens is you may think that there is a specific opportunity, but the data may not support that. And what I mean is the data analysis shows that maybe that problem was not either as big a problem as you thought it was, or it's a much bigger problem. Or during the course of analyzing the problem, doing your analysis work, well, before you get to the analytics work, you find out maybe there is a bigger problem that you were not aware of that needs to be resolved. So spending substantial time understanding the current process, understanding your data, and more importantly, also understanding your current organization's culture has to be the starting point for a successful solution. Because while the technical aspect of it is challenging and there is enough opportunities there, if you don't get that upfront investment in using a different set of algorithms, if you're solving the wrong problem, is not necessarily going to help you in the long term. The second aspect of it is building the technical solution itself once you have done the analysis part, frankly, and then being able to experiment. And this is where experimentation is very important, because we should be able to experiment with different options, with different algorithms, with different types of data. Be open to the idea of combining not just data from different structured source systems, but also looking at semi-structured data, looking at unstructured data, looking at external data. There's often people say that in certain cases, especially in consumer-driven industries, there is more data about your organization that exists outside the four walls than exists within the four walls. And how do you get to that unless you're willing to look at that external data? Then creating the solution is the third part of it. But the fourth more important part is validating that solution, validating the soundness of the solution, not being fooled by taking a data set that gives you the results that you want, checking for things like overfitting, being skeptical about your results, both personally as solution designers and engineers and data scientists and analysts, but also then building together what I would call a test and learn phase with the business users, with people who are not technical, to make sure that passes their sniff test. And if possible, I would strongly recommend also bringing customers into the mix. So a successful solution at the tactical level involves these four pieces. It involves
Mm,
analysis, it involves experimentation, it involves solution building, and then validation and feedback loops.
mm, that's great. Yeah, no, look, I mean, I personally have to agree that that is a, that's a great way to frame how to approach these things and how to step by step work through building a solution. Just to sort of wrap up this solutions part of our discussion, what are you seeing is the most optimal technology stack? Because there's a lot of options out there. What do you think is a quality technology stack to actually make these analytics solutions come to life, or sort of to bring it, to create them, to prototype them within organizations effectively?
So I'm going to be biased, Sam, if you're going to ask me a loaded question like that. And I'm going to
Sure,
say
absolutely.
with a certain degree of objectivity and pride that H2O AI is known as the number one AI ML company on the planet.
Hmm.
We have about 20,000 enterprise customers who
Wow.
use our product. We
Yeah.
have hundreds of thousands of data scientists and data analysts and business users who use the outcomes of the solutions that come out of our product. So
Yeah.
I think the track record is definitely there. There's a reason I
Hmm.
came back to H2O after all my travels around the globe, is because
Yeah.
I implicitly believe in what I said. And then Gartner, I think, among others, have consistently rated H2O as a visionary in the space for years now. But
Right.
I do want to say that I'm not speaking on behalf of H2O in this one. It's just that I'm extremely happy and proud to be working for the company. But I
Hmm.
would like to also generalize the question that you asked. In
Hmm.
general, if we take a look at what is happening, especially in non-regulated industries, such as, I would say, maybe healthcare or life sciences. Let's just keep those aside. I'll come back to them. If you take a look at more the consumer facing industries, I think the cloud is becoming a very, very important uh, transformative factor in
Hmm.
how data and analytics is being done. And the reason for that is quite a few reasons. Number one is people are not having to invest upfront a huge amount of capital expenditure on servers and software that they don't end up using.
Hmm.
And I think the cloud has certainly democratized software development in many ways that would have been almost maybe unthinkable 10 years ago, because you're able to spin things up and you're able to get things going. And
Hmm.
the transformative effect of the cloud in being able to use just as much horsepower you need, and then the flexibility in increasing that horsepower or decreasing that horsepower without being stuck into long-term contracts for on capital expenditure and being able to use OPEX, I think has been a significant transformative factor in the
Hmm.
last 5 years, definitely, where we see even more staid industries that haven't been at the cutting edge of technology start investing tremendously in the cloud, especially public cloud
Hmm.
options.
Yeah.
When you get
Yeah.
to regulated industries like healthcare and life sciences and insurance and others, government, for example, where privacy protection matters a lot and the cost of having your data, let's say, shared widely is significant, not just from a financial perspective, but also from a governance perspective and what it can do. Then I would say the private cloud is increasingly a very huge option that people are looking at. In some cases where your
Hmm.
data is so sensitive and you want to keep it absolutely within your control, then on premise is going to continue to remain an option. So, what I would tell your listeners is have an open mind on what solution works best for what use case and what value you want. What I have found from my experience is there is no one size fits all solution. So I wouldn't tell any client that you must absolutely go the public route or you must absolutely go the on-premise route. The reality is going to be depending on the problem space or the opportunity space, depending on the types of users, the impact, and frankly, financials, you may have to continue to live in a hybrid world where some of your solutions will still be on premise, some of them will be on the private cloud, and some of them may be on the public cloud. And that I think is a very practical, realistic option to where things are going to be, and that's not going away anytime soon. Um, there has also been a lot of conversation about multi-clouds, and it's a topic that takes a lot of time and effort that people spend a lot of time discussing. I do understand the benefits of a multi-cloud approach, but what I would tell a lot of enterprises is it's great to have a multi-cloud strategy, but focus on being successful on one cloud first
Mhm.
before you start agonizing over why you need a multi-cloud. Because if you have not succeeded with one cloud, then frankly, you have to try at least one and take lessons from it before you go with the multi-cloud. So I wouldn't say don't go with the multi-cloud approach, but what I would say is don't let the multi-cloud approach divert you from at least making one cloud work for you.
Right.
The
Right.
other piece I would say is in terms of data science itself, just as we are seeing in other parts of the technology world, being able to harness data through automated machine learning is only going to increase. It's not going to decrease. And the option of being able to leverage data science products and AI/ML products is here, and it's here to stay.
Mm.
So as we live in this datafied world, and I just made that term up, um, and going back to your earlier question about solutions, I think the ability to get rapid verifiable value is going to be driven to a large extent by your ability to harness the data as fast as possible to create as much value as possible and as cheap as possible. And the
Yeah.
two trends that I mentioned are going to lead to it.
Yeah. So, in summary, the way I sort of see it from your points is that you obviously need to have a solution, a cloud solution, which stores all your data. Then you need a solution where you can clean your data, and then you need a solution that visualizes the data. I mean that's a very simplified version of it, but you know that to me seems like the stack which the broad stack which can help you achieve these analytic solutions relatively quickly.
I cannot name the customer for confidentiality reasons, but
Hmm.
Sam, one of the most successful efforts that I have been involved in the last few years, pretty recent, but let's just say last few years,
Hmm.
um, has been a solution where we took an Excel spreadsheet with macros that was being used by hundreds of users to do predictive pricing. And what we did over there was, if you kind of take a look at the system that was being used, it was an Excel spreadsheet.
Hmm.
And what we did there was we could have approached that in two ways. We could have said, to take advantage of the power of AI, ML, and the cloud, the first thing you need to do is you need to replace this pricing system with a completely new pricing system that is either based on the cloud, or at least if it's not based on the cloud, it uses an on-premise newer version. But that's not the approach that my team and I decided to do. We said we are going to keep the Excel spreadsheet as is. We're not going to touch the Excel spreadsheet. Why? Because there are hundreds of users using it. And we wanted the value of AI ML to be accessible by those business users and process users without necessarily putting a new solution which was going to cost millions of dollars and without retraining them. So what we did instead was we kept them in the Excel spreadsheet. And we just created a generate price button on the same spreadsheet that they had before. And when
Mhm.
they click the generate code button, it would extract the data out of the spreadsheet, multiple data points. It would send it to a product specific machine learning model on the cloud. It would calculate things in real time. And in a few seconds, come and repopulate the spreadsheet.
Mm.
That basically people never saw the difference. They were still using a spreadsheet. It was an interface that they are used to using. So there was really the impact of changing the system wasn't there. The impact of retraining wasn't there. And people felt comfortable. But at the same time, what we were able to do was in a secure way, in an imaginative, successful way, be able to actually use an AI ML solution that was able to give much better results than what people were used to, and do it within a closed loop ecosystem that went from the spreadsheet to the AIML and brought it back to the spreadsheet in a few seconds so that they could get the best of both worlds. So that's, I think, key is always have an open mind about what's going to work. And the answer to using AIML is not always scratch my palm with $1 million coin and I'll tell you what your future is. The answer in many cases is focus on value, not sophistication, right? And what I mean by that is the sophistication comes out of the data and the AIML, not necessarily having the latest and greatest pricing system. If an Excel spreadsheet works, use it.
Mm. Yeah, that's brilliant. It seems like you in that specific example worked with the existing environment. And I think everyone forgets when you go and change something, there's all these ancillary costs that can pop up that you never even factored in. And if you can embed your solutions somehow into existing workflows, that is a truly optimized way of actually achieving a really valuable result.
We were able to get results out in a space of 12 weeks, Sam.
Yeah, yeah.
So the models were built essentially in 12 weeks. They were instantiated, they were integrated with APIs, all of
Mm-hmm.
that in 12 weeks. And that included, by the way, user testing too. So it took us about 8 weeks to build the AIML solution, 4 weeks to user test it, and then go into production. And
Mm.
that is an example of going back to your earlier question about how do we demonstrate that solutions work? When you deliver value in 12 weeks that people basically are able to use without significant cognitive overload, then people love you and they
Mm.
want you to do more. And that is the way that we build love and we build support for the increased use of data and analytics in what we do.
Mm. One thing I really like about that example as well is, and what it really highlights is uh, a really exciting trend in technology where everything is becoming more modular. Like in the past, you sort of had to say, okay, I want to go with Microsoft or I want to go with SAP, and then you're sort of locked into that solution. But most solutions now are being built upon this um, this diverse technology stack, the historic technology stack that already exists within organizations. And what you need to do is you kind of need to plug into what is already there rather than totally replacing. And I think that a lot of the analytics technologies, especially like Power BI and Tableau, which is things that we focus on at Enterprise DNA, sort of more widely, more broadly, but even with the ML technologies, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of emerging ML and AI tech that is sort of low code, no code, modular, can sort of plug into all of these different data sources, data technologies, and I think that that is going to exponentially increase the amount of solutions that can be created, and also the speed to value. The the time to value, like the example you just gave, is not as significant because you can really plug in, you can really modularize what you are actually doing and put it connect it up to what is already existing within organizations, which can sometimes be using quite old and historic tools.
That's exactly right. And I think the other point also is I'm not suggesting in the slightest that every solution will take 8 to 12 weeks. Some solutions will take longer by the nature of the beast. For
Mm-hmm.
example, if you're trying to reimagine customer engagement, you're not going to be able to do everything in 8 weeks, right? If you take a look at IVRs, if you take a look at chatbots, if you take a look at more traditional ways, for example, portals, or dare I say it, there's a reason that postal services exist around the world. They haven't gone away. Even traditional things such as mail and so on and so forth. You may not always get a solution that works in 8 weeks for everything. But at the same time, our value has to be focused on agile ways of doing things, end to end, soup to nuts. It's not just modularized, but it's modularized for incremental value, which means that every 4 weeks of effort, for example, 2 sprints maybe, needs to result in verifiable value that somebody can use. And if you're not creating value in those 4 weeks, then you have to really question what you're doing. And in certain, for example, there may be one particular set of value streams that may take 6 weeks. That's okay. The 4 weeks is not a hard and fast rule. Some may take 2 weeks. But the key thing is to keep your audience, to keep your users, whether they are internal business users or customers, constantly engaged in getting value out of it so that they support you when it's needed, when you need some more time. And I think you hit the nail on the head that modularization is here to stay. And frankly, everybody now has, people like to think of the world as always standardizable, if that's the right word. But the reality is, as you also rightly pointed out, modularization and best of breed solutions are here to stay. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
way it's going to be.
Yeah, I think it's exciting times, right? I think the fact that you can go in and propose a solution either from a consulting point of view or even internally. You don't have to go in and sell this enormous piece of software anymore. I mean, 10 years ago, yes. I mean, you probably had to propose some $1 million implementation to get anything of value. But these days, you can just plug it into your existing toolkit, and there's just enormous opportunities, like unlimited opportunities, if you can just get creative. And I love the creativity of that. If you're a creative business a person in sort of a business space, you can propose and create value out of data in so many different ways that it really just is down to your imagination. And I think that is that's sort of the bulk of what it takes to be able to achieve things in this space.
If I may just play off what you just said, because you mentioned a couple of things, Sam, which I think are extremely important. In my upcoming next book, Demystifying AI for the Enterprise, again, this is not a technical book. It's really a book for executives, it's a book for managers, and it's a book for non-technical people. And that's what most of my books are. They are really demystifying technology and trends for non-technical users, because we always hear the word, well, how do we lift the game, right? That's a metaphor that's used often. How do we democratize technology? How do we reduce the digital divide? Well, you cannot do any of those, frankly speaking, unless people know what you're talking about, and unless they realize how the work that people like you and I do actually impacts them in a way. First, they should be able to understand it. Second, they should be able to understand enough to help you with the solutions that they want. And third, they should be able to get value out of it. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is something called the impact framework, with the I actually standing for imagination. So being able to create a culture of imagination, which I define as invention on one hand, discovery on the other, and innovation on the third. All of those three create imagination in the enterprise. The M in impact stands for maturity. Not all organizations are at the same place in being able to use all their data. The maturity curve varies substantially, not just across enterprises and organizations, but in many cases, even within a single organization. You may have certain businesses in an organization that are extremely mature with data and analytics, others that have a plan to get there but are not quite there. And understanding that this can vary both across organizations and, more importantly, within an organization is important. The P stands for people, because people are the most important part of any technology solution, including AI. Like we discussed earlier, if you're not able to bring value to people, if you don't get people involved in the solutioning, and if you don't make their lives easier and more fulfilling, they have every right to question, what does this do for us? The A in impact stands for augmentation and amplification that goes a step beyond automation, right? The C stands for culture, because in the end, our goal is to be able to change the culture, the not just the culture of using technology, but a culture of creating data driven insights and stories based on data, but more importantly, changing the culture so that everybody in the organization is able to talk on the same terms, and it becomes an evidence based conversation, a data driven conversation, in addition to gut check or gut feeling. Right? I'm not the kind of person who says that gut feeling doesn't matter, because gut feeling sometimes tends to be a subliminal reaction to what you may have experienced, but it is not the same as data. And then finally, T, transformation. Because in the end, we are doing all this is to transform, not just digitally from an organizational perspective, but transform the experience of our customers, transform the experience of our users, and dare I say it, transform the experience of business and technology users. So the impact framework looks at these six different dimensions, and it's something that you talked about the years of experience that I've been doing this, both in the product space and in the consulting space. So I thought real hard about this. I talked to some experts around, quite a few experts around the globe, and this is the framework I came up with, which I really believe addresses the strategic needs, demands, and how you approach transformation at scale using analytics, AI, and data.
Yeah, no, I love that. So maturity, people, amplification, culture, and transformation.
Yep, and imagination, to your point, right? Because in the end, we must be able to imagine the art of the possible. And imagination cannot be like our kids imagine things, frankly, though some of that is also not a bad idea, right? Being able to go beyond things. I would say that imagination is the fundamental thing, which is why it starts off the whole thing, because it's the bedrock of an organization's capability to shape the future proactively by encouraging new technologies, changing organizational methods, and empowering new ways of creative thinking. So the most successful organizations in the world, be they enterprise-sized organizations or startups or unicorns, they thrive on creating new markets, new users, or new uses for existing products and solutions by going boldly forth where no human has gone before, to use a popular term. And you can't do that unless you encourage this imagination and let people bring that to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there is so much opportunity out there in the data space across AI, machine learning, just general analytics, like just general dashboard development. Imagination, I think, is probably the key. Probably be up in the top three, or almost the most important thing. Just understanding or evaluating what is possible. And I think if you can that's a big part of what this podcast is all about, really, is what we're trying to do with this podcast is, if you can create that analytic mind, then that's going to build your imagination in this space, and you're going to be able to identify a lot of these opportunities. One of the things that I also wanted to mention, because I love that acronym of impact, and all of the detail and behind that, a lot of it resonates with me, because with at Enterprise DNA we have this concept called the analytics flywheel, and a lot of those concepts that you discussed there, they fit into our framework as well, where you evaluate what the potential of the solution is, you build it, you then get feedback from you prototype it, get feedback from your users, you productize it, and continue to get feedback, and then it just builds this feedback loop, right? This flywheel around your analytics initiatives. And I think a lot of those points that you make also, there should be another sort of circle around that flywheel that sort of says, okay, all of these other things can be impacted significantly if you can get this flywheel working.
Yeah, and I really like how you mentioned the flywheel, because an ideal flywheel, frankly speaking, once it's in motion, is in perpetual motion.
Yeah.
Right? You remove all other physical qualities that prevent a flywheel from being in perpetual motion, like friction or somebody interrupting it. But that's what you want. You want that flywheel to be in perpetual motion, to be looking at these differentials, to be learning. So I would say that it's almost a learning doing flywheel, so to speak, where every action, every behavior, every piece of data, and that's what data represents, right, Sam? In the end, people tend to think of, sometimes non-data people think like, oh my God, these data geeks so esoteric. No, data is not really esoteric. Data is the quantitative capture in mathematical terms, or the qualitative capture of what actions and behaviors are. And that's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
And we as human beings have always been either data producing creatures or data consuming creatures. Now, if you go back to the most ancient texts that we have, be they in the Egyptian civilization or the Indus Valley civilization or the Chinese civilization, if you look at those, again, humans, technology tends to change. Human needs, wants, and desires don't tend to change. They become more refined as a result of available technology. The most ancient text that we have, for example, from Egypt, that's carved in stone, is how much food needed to be provided to the people building the pyramids, and what was the ebb and flow of the Nile like, and so on and so forth. The thing that made humans more productive and happier. Same thing with the Indus Valley. The earliest documents from the Indus Valley civilization in India are all about trade, frankly. And if you look at the Chinese civilization, where you, again, when I'm looking at recorded history, the earliest documents are about when almanacs, when to plant crops, when to harvest crops, what planetary conditions outside of Earth do in terms of pulls and pushes in the environment we live in. So just because we are 6,000 years, 5,000, 6,000 years down the line, doesn't mean that that fundamental nature of humans being data producing creatures and data consuming creatures has gone away.
No, I mean, it's a fascinating way to look at it, right? And you even sort of look in 100 years into the future, and you think, well, how far can this go? How are we going to be a civilization which just relies on data for everything? It's highly likely that is probably going to be the case, right? If you think about a lot of the work that's being happening now. But what I want to do, Prashant, because I know we've got only a limited amount of time here, I really actually want to just dive into some real world scenarios that you have been involved in around the AI space, because this is not a topic that we have dived into in any significant way on previous episodes. And I feel, because AI can sometimes feel for, say, a data analyst or just a business user, something that's unachievable, that they can't do it themselves. But I feel like things are changing. I feel like there is a lot of no-code solutions. The AI space and ML space is being democratized somewhat. And I think it would be great to give a little bit of an insight around the impact that you can have implementing these specific solutions. So maybe just going over some, you don't have to go into anything specific, just more broadly, like what sort of impact can you have in some real world situations with these sort of solutions.
So you did say that we have a very short amount of time, but you kind of asked me a question that can be its own podcast, because that is
well,
what
we'll have to get you on again.
oh, I would love to be back, because that's what I think the opportunity in front of us is, Sam. And I'm going to go, just because in interest of time, I'm going to talk about a few select things, right?
Yeah.
But the universe of opportunity out there is fantastic. It's such an exciting time to be in AI and analytics, frankly, because of one reason, what you mentioned, the low code, no code solutions. The second is auto ML, auto machine learning, for those of you readers who are not familiar. The third is, you talked about democratizing AI, and that's a very important thing because it has to be reused by the most. It has to be used by the most, reused, and deployed as solutions in order for it to create the greatest impact. So I'll take a few select examples. This is by no means the be all and end all, but it's just a few ones. So I'll take kind of one of the most important things. Uh, Through our lifetime, we would at least know a few people in our network who will unfortunately either have cancer or die of cancer. Let's take, and I don't mean to be morbid about it, but that's the reality, right? There are various numbers which suggest that we out of every 5 people, there's at least one person you will know who will either have cancer or die of cancer. And if you take a look at some of the work we are currently doing right now at H2O, for example, we are, without naming clients, we are looking at a combination of phenotypic data, or what is called clinical data, your height, weight, your history of prior disease, where you live in, what the environment around you looks like, and so on and so forth, your genomic data and your medical imaging data. And we can, with a high degree of accuracy, that is also clinically validated, predict, for example, how long you're going to survive a cancer. And that matters. It matters. It matters to the person suffering from cancer, but more importantly, it matters to their family members and friends. That's one example. Another example, again, using the healthcare context, is diabetes is the number one chronic disease in most developing countries today. And if you kind of take a look at India and China, it is creating havoc. Over there, we are able to predict, for example, diabetic retinopathy, what it's going to do to your eyesight. Can you imagine essentially somebody losing their eyes and not being prepared for it or not knowing that it's going to happen? So it's not only predicting when your eyesight might go, it also brings a level of education and awareness, which tells you, look, if you don't change certain things, or if your medications are not changed, or if your disease is not managed in a proactive way, this is what is going to happen in this time. So that's two examples of healthcare. If you take a look at the world we live in now as a result of COVID, AI has had a huge role in deciding, for example, how vaccines work, right? We have had such a short time frame from when the virus happened, and the development of the vaccine has been vastly accelerated. And the data that is coming out of R&D, the research and development into a drug, for example, or the data that has gone into looking at the clinical trial results, all of that has been accelerated vastly with AI and analytics. And that is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but it's one of the big reasons why we have the various vaccines we have today, because the speed of analyzing the data has been vastly accelerated. If you take a look at, for example, other use cases, customer engagement, which is something I have done quite a bit in the last 3 years, both for a large bank in Australia and also more recently. In the end, when customers use a chatbot or they call into a call center, humans don't call into a call center, Sam, to have a conversation like you and I are having for the pleasure of it. They call into a call center or they engage with a chatbot to get an answer so that they can get back to their life. Being able to use a combination of natural language processing and predictive analytics to create successful customer engagements and happy customers is another huge use case. I always joke that the most popular answer that you get a chatbot without AI is, I don't know what you're talking about. Please rephrase the question. How frustrating it is as a user, as a customer, to have that experience. On the other hand, if you can have an NLP that is fine-tuned to giving you an answer, understanding semantics, understanding slang, for example, and being able to give you a more accurate answer, just imagine how happier a customer would be and what it does for an organization's branding and reputation, for example.
Mm.
Then in the insurance space, one of the things that is we are seeing a lot right now, and I'm certainly seeing a lot right now, is just the sheer ease. This is computer vision. Now you go have an accident, God forbid, and one of two things could happen. It could be a horrible accident where multiple things in your vehicle are damaged and you need an assessor to actually come and do a physical review. But in a lot of cases, it's just a fender bender, or you may have a dent. So take a picture with your smartphone, upload it, and let the computer vision and the AI figure out how bad the damage is and whether that claim can be paid right away or whether they should send an assessor to your house. Right?
Mm.
Those are, again, just some representative examples across healthcare, banking, utilities also, for example, where there's a lot of customer engagement going on, or insurance, where these things are becoming more and more relevant. And especially as we start taking again, an excellent example of where AI/ML has really come to life is self-driving cars. Now, how does a self-driving car work? It's not magic. It's actually data, machine learning, and deep learning. These cameras capture the various things that are happening as you're driving. They process that, use that as training data to reform and refine the experience of the self-driving car. So again, we live in a wonderful time. And like I said, there are, in my opinion, at least about 100 use cases per industry,
Mm. Yeah,
where
that's crazy.
AI/ML can have a demonstrable impact today.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing, isn't it? It is truly amazing if you can really dive into the variety of things that can be achieved by implementing and creating these sort of solutions. Well, let's just delve into that a little bit more, because I want to create something super relevant for our listeners out there. So let's just take a consumer goods company, for example. What are some low cost? Let's just think. What are some things that you like, some ML and AI solutions that you think someone could look at even today, and maybe kickstart a prototype solution on a few. What are some examples that you think someone could look at almost
Wow.
immediately?
Wow. Oh, again, it's such a juicy question right there. So I think
Yeah.
let's again, as you may have realized, Sam, just through these conversations and some of our previous interactions,
Mm,
is my focus is always on customer first and business first. Right.
mm,
So because that's the background I come from. I come from a product background who has always been focused on customers and users primarily, and technology on the other hand. I tend to bridge those two together as a solutions expert. So what I would say is the first one, if you take an FMCG company, a fast moving consumer goods company, for example, there are a few things, right? So the first thing would be identifying your buyers and identifying your audience. So that could be, again, there's multiple dimensions to that. One is discovering new buyers and new audiences that you didn't know existed before, first and
mhm,
foremost. An excellent example is the beer and diapers anecdote, which people use all the time, which is, well, typically
mm,
speaking, when dad goes, not being gender specific here, but typically men tend to consume more beer than women. So again, dad goes to buy beer, wife says, hey, pick up diapers too. So placing beers and diapers closer to each other makes it more likely that dad will not forget the diapers and just doesn't come back with a six pack, right?
Right.
So that's one example. The another example is recommendation systems, right? Which are very, very
Mm,
popular. For example, people who bought this also bought that.
mm,
So if you are going to, for example, buy a sanitation product, that is a spray, there's a good chance that if wipes are available, you're going to buy wipes too. Or maybe you're going to buy a sanitation product and you're going to buy an air freshener to go with that to get rid of the smell of the sanitation product. If it or bleach and air freshener. That could be a second example, right?
yeah.
And there's also the fundamental fact that we like to think humans tend to be social creatures, right? We are social creatures. So people like you also bought this, which is another type of a recommendation system,
Mm,
almost peer advice, right? So that I think is a fantastic example for an FMCG. The other thing could be, okay, you have done all this hard work now. Now take a look at what is happening with COVID waves. We have now, you're in New Zealand, so we're not going to take you as an example at all because you're doing such a good job of managing COVID. But let's talk about the rest of us who are not. Um, they are going through waves, right? And this is happening throughout the world now. It's happening in Europe, it's happening in the United States, it's happening in various places. And as these COVID waves are going up and down based on geography, based on locality, and so on and so forth, or the type of demographic that's affected, there will be a need for certain goods that accompany an increase in the number of COVID cases compared to when it goes down. I saw this very interesting data point, for example, that the price of face masks in Australia is among its lowest right now compared to what it was. They are selling face masks at a discount in
mm,
Australia compared to, say, 6 months ago when the waves were much higher. So that allows you to do two things. It allows you to adjust your supply chain to make sure you're not creating, stocking, and retailing more face masks that are necessary. It also allows you to adjust the FMCG product demand by product to the COVID wave in question or where the number of cases are going to be. And
mm,
then there's always customer engagement, right? So if you've got a, let's just stick with the face mask example. Um, you got a face mask that doesn't make people look cool. Well, we know face masks are not exactly the number one fashion accessory, but let's just be frank about it, right? People are more likely to use products that makes them look better. If I'm going to use a face mask and it makes me look like an ass, chances are I'm going to change that to use a face mask that makes me more presentable. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Twitter and say that, look
mm,
at this, like which one looks better, right? I mean, an extreme example, but an example of where, for example, you can use that kind of external feedback that is happening to be able to fine tune and to be able to appeal to the human desire in all of us to be social creatures and to look good and feel good, right? And I think just in the
mm,
FMCG example, that's just a smattering of use cases. We have not talked about what we can do in HR and talent management. We have not talked about finance. We have not talked about marketing, frankly, at any length. We have not talked about manufacturing and production, right? So
mm,
when you see that, and this is what our book talks about, it takes a look at each of these areas and it says these
mm,
are all the things you can actually do with AI. And it's not just consumer facing stuff, by the way, where AI is important. It is also the internal stuff, right? The supply chain part of it, HR and talent management, for example, finance, right? Being able to predict what the COVID waves are going to do to your financial numbers, or potentially what advice you want to give to the stock market in terms of guidance. I think those are all important use cases, Sam.
I loved going through those because to me, we discussed this earlier. A big part of uh, building solutions or is just identifying what's possible is actually getting the imagination going around what can be done. And even those just quick examples that you gave are just and incredible. I mean, the value that you can generate just from working on those in any business. And to me, when you listen to that as well, when I hear you talk about those possibilities, you can kind of see that the world is going to be taken over by AI, because the predictions are just going to become so much more precise in every way, across every different industry, in every different business function. And it's almost going to be paramount to have the analytical capabilities within your organization to take advantage of these predictions, and to be able to plug into these predictions in some sort of way that AI can provide for you. And so, how that evolves over time, especially with the democratization of it, is seriously exciting.
That's right, Sam. Again, I have been very vocal about this in the many podcasts I've done, in the keynotes I've done, and frankly, in the books I write. Right,
Mm,
5 years ago, there were these real, you know, people predicting when AI is going to replace human beings. And there were these dire predictions about when will artificial general intelligence happen when an AI is more intelligent than a human. There were some people who I won't name who came out with some really frightening predictions on, oh my God, none of us are going to have jobs because AI is going to take over the world. And even Sam and Prashant won't be talking to each other. It'll be AI alter egos of Sam that are talking to the AI alter ego of Prashant. Absolutely weird, to be honest with you. And I have always
mm,
felt that if you take, again, I tend to be a student of not just business and technology, but also a student of history. Because you can look back into history to look at fundamental human behavior, right? And AI is not going to take over your jobs. AI is not going to do involuntary colonoscopies that you don't want. The Skynet part of AI, like many things in Hollywood, i- the, there's a fantastic, and I don't mean that in a positive sense, a fantasy, more like it, aspect to it. In the next few decades, we are not going to see that happen. The human brain is the least understood and the most complex organ in the human body. To
mm.
assume somehow a deep neural network can replace the human brain, it tells me that you don't know enough about deep neural nets, or you don't know enough about the human brain, or more likely both. The reality is that AI is going to be augmentation, it's going to be amplification, and it's going to lead to a future where humans are going to be better off as a result. It's not going to be the Terminator Skynet effect at all. And I frankly, um, and the more, when I said this about 5 years ago, there was a bit of skepticism. Oh my God, do you know what you're talking about? 5 years hence, I think I've got more converts to my point of view than otherwise, frankly, and that's only
Yeah.
increasing by the day.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I still read things like Oxford University saying that 47% of jobs will disappear. I mean, it's just BS. I don't believe any of that stuff. Yes, people are just going to have to evolve and do different things, but I think they'll be doing better things. Like, I mean, I can't think of anything worse than, I mean, and this is just from my perspective, but having to sort of drive a truck or drive a car in traffic. I mean, if autonomous machines can do that, that's great. Then we can go and do something more productive with our time. We can give support or care to others, or we can, there's just, I mean, there's just so many things that people can be doing, which will make their lives better, and our lives will be better because things will be cheaper. And I mean, there's just so many flow-on effects that are really positive for all of this change.
So, Sam, last comment on this is, if you kind of, I'll use two examples again. I mentioned I was a student of history because it teaches us a lot, right? I'll use two examples.
Yep.
New York City had a lot of horse carriage drivers. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when the
Mm-hmm.
automotive engine came about and cars came about, did the horse carriage drivers, did they lose their jobs? Yes, they did. Absolutely. There was a period of transitioning where they had to retrain themselves to do other things. But if you see, what that did was it was really the steam engine and the automotive engine were the basis of the industrial revolution and the increasing prosperity and happiness that we have had as humans. So yes, there was a bit of negative effect, but the net positive on society was a huge positive, right? At the
Mm-hmm.
turn of the 19th century and the earliest part of the 20th century, there was a CEO that every company had. It was called the chief electricity officer. This person's job was to take this new technology called electricity and try and figure out how to wire it into their existing business processes to make
Yeah.
electricity real. In 20 years, that CEO disappeared to be
Mm.
replaced by today's CEO because electricity became a part and parcel of industrial manufacturing and heck, our
Mm-hmm.
lives. So I see the same thing with AI, right? I don't see,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I said this at a conference a couple of months ago. I said 20 years from now, we may not see the chief data officer and the chief analytics officer and the chief AI officer because, like the old CEO, those will become such a part and parcel of an organization's DNA that they are going to disappear and there'll be new things that are coming in. And that's what I see from an enterprise point of view.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. Okay, well, do you want to? This has been fascinating conversation, Prasant. Do you want to just do a bit more of a plug around your book? I'm interested to know a bit more about it myself.
Yeah, sure. We have been working on this book called Demystifying AI for the Enterprise. It's going to be published by Taylor and Francis um, in the UK. They have an imprint called CRC Press in the US. They also published my last book. Great publisher. I can't say nice enough things about our acquisitions editor and publisher, Chris Bednansky. Um, Chris, you owe me a beer. Um, my co-authors on this one are several leading lights. There is Lee Wilkinson, who's my colleague at H2O.ai, who in many ways I would say is one of the earliest uh, uh, influencers and the person who created and wrote the grammar of graphics. So Lee has written the visualization section of Demystifying AI for the enterprise. I can't think of a better person to do that. We've got Shanta Mohan, who is writing on AI in retail. My friend Bob Rogers, who has written on AI in supply chain and AI in talent and HR management. Ed Dixon from Ireland, who has written a couple of chapters on architectural solutions for AI and also AI in and corporate social responsibility, along with Lisa T and Jonas Christensen, who I worked with when I was in Australia, who has written the section on AI in financial services, and then Kirk Bone, who has written on AI and customer relationship management and customer engagement. So I think that's all of them. I don't think I have missed anyone over here, and shame on me if I did. And the other thing is we also have multiple case studies over here. Again, I always believe strongly that it's one thing to write about ideas and write about use cases. People tend to read books that have example, best practices and examples. So have you been there? Yes.
Mhm.
What are the positive things you have learned? What can you share through the book, the stuff that didn't work, and can you give us some validated case studies? So, and I think that's what we have done here. It's not talk about the amazing things, the AI enabled toaster that will buy your bread for you, will slice your bread, toast it, and eat it for you, right? That's not what we do here. But we talk about more practical things, and hence the title Demystifying AI for the Enterprise. And the audience for this is going to be primarily people who want to understand and apply AI and analytics in the business world, in organizational context. And the fundamental building block is the impact framework built upon the vertical specific and horizontal specific expertise that comes on top, um, topped off by the case studies as the icing.
Fascinating, fascinating. No, I think, I mean, obviously you've identified yourself that there's a huge market for that sort of knowledge, and I couldn't agree more. Even, I would say that there's a huge market just in the analytics space for that. What's possible just with general reporting and dashboarding that you can do with Power BI and Tableau even. I mean, just real world examples of the impact that can be made with these new data solutions. And so, to be honest, I'm excited to have a read of that myself.
No, thank you, Sam. And just to touch upon that, right? The other thing that people sometimes, especially in my consulting world and other roles, people used to always ask me, "Oh, is it AI or BI?" And my answer is that's such a wrong question. It's not either or, it's both. And I talk about this a lot, which is the basic building blocks for both BI and AI is data. And you still have to acquire your data, you have to manage your data, you have to govern your data to make BI work. Guess what you have to do for AI? You have to acquire data, you have to manage your data, you have to govern your data. So I see essentially, the AI and BI as, two sides of the same coin. You are using the same data in many cases, right? With AI, you have more opportunities with computer vision and natural language processing, admittedly. But that being said, it's not either or. In several cases, BI leads to AI because once you have discovered a data set and you have done BI on top of it, you can now discover new opportunities of bringing predictive analytics to bear or anomaly detection, forecasting, classification, and so on and so forth. In other examples, and this is what I share with a lot of my clients, is AI also leads to BI. For example, I can't mention the client again, did a lot of natural language processing with a bank in a past life. And guess how they could consume that data? We basically created a dashboard for them. So the NLP led to a dashboard. And once they saw the dashboard, it became easier for them, for example, to understand what topics are people talking about on weekdays versus weekends. When do people contact you for a lost credit card? Do they do it on Friday evening or Saturday evening or Monday morning? It tells you, for example, what's the demand for a home loan product vis-a-vis a credit card. Or one of the things we found was this was a very, very interesting one. We found a certain brand that was not the bank that was coming up in their top 10 terms. Why? Well, because this bank was basically doing their frequent flyer miles credit card. You can get the insights out of NLP, but unless you present it in a visual, you present it in a dashboard or a scorecard that somebody can consume, people will not be able to cognitively access that information unless we do it in a simpler way. So I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not AI or BI, it's AI and BI, one and the other, going back to augmentation and amplification. That's another example of where these two come together.
That's great. I think we'll call it there, Prashant, because we've gone past an hour now, and we've talked about so much that it would be almost information overload. So I think this is a good point to turn off. And thanks for giving us a bit more insight around the new book that you're writing as well, and how relevant it would be to those listening to dive into further. So. I understand it's not released just yet, so it's coming out this year. So yeah, I'm super excited to get my hands on that and have a read of it myself. So thank you for a great episode. Really enjoyed your insights, and I think you're someone that would love to get back on at some point because you touch on a really interesting topic that we particularly in this particular podcast we do focus more on the BI side in a lot of cases. So having that AI perspective is going to provide a lot of value to our listeners. So and it's something that I myself want to get a lot more insight into also, and how the impact can be a large impact can be created with those sort of solutions as well. So thank you so much for your time and coming on.
Thank you, Sam. And the next time, hopefully, when we do this, we'll have a chance to do it in person in Auckland. And that's a reason enough for me to do it again.
Well, it could be some time before anyone's allowed into New Zealand, so we'll just have to see. It depends how the vaccination rollout goes in the US, I would say, which is not so good at the moment.
Yeah, there's opportunity there.
Okay. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Analytic Mind podcast. Hope you enjoyed today's session. I certainly did. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave us some feedback. We always read it. So thanks again, Prashant. All the best, everyone.